there's a notion that non-human intelligence could be from a different timeline, from a future, and could be kind of checking in on us to see how we're progressing, you know, and that they may be influencing us in subtle ways, maybe trying to prevent us from doing something catastrophic. Maybe they're related to us in some way, you know, because there's this idea that they're anthropomorphic, right? They got two arms, two legs, two eyes, you know, they're kind of like us, even though they may not all look like us or whatever. They are anthropomorphic, you know, and so, and I don't know as though that would happen if they developed in some place light years away in a totally different ecosystem, totally different environment, gravity, and all that. You know, who knows what they would look like, right? So the fact that these experiencers and these other people that kind of are in the know are saying these things makes me believe that they're from here, right? And then that's when you get into like the Michael Masters stuff. You know, he's this Harvard professor and he believes that it's future humans. I don't know if it's future humans, but I think he makes a good point that they're a lot like us. Some people say they look just like us. It's all very strange, man. And then you get into the limiting factors of our senses, you know, the way we experience time, all this stuff. They may experience time totally different. Um, I want to like kind of equate it. Like, you ever see like an ant walking across the floor? Like, do you think that they're aware of you looking down at them? Probably not. You know, is this a similar kind of situation with us and non-human intelligence? Would we even know if they're there?
So it sounds kind of kooky, but if you've been paying close attention, you read the language and you listen to the statements made by some of our most senior national security officials and congressional, national leadership. They're as serious as a heart attack. I mean, this is like no joke.
Matthew Pines, where are you in the whole kind of this is because you had this like percentage thing before?
Mm-hmm. Well, these are clearly real phenomenon. Even the government has said that. The question is, what underlying explanation do we think accounts for the most mysterious aspects of the phenomena? And there I don't have like high credences in terms of any particular explanation. But I think it's very clear that there's something exotic, very unusual happening that we can't prosaically explain. And so that forces us into categories of explanation that we maybe have not historically treated very seriously. So that's like where I am. I think we are now in a position where we have to take those more exotic explanations very seriously.
Definitely real?
Yeah, definitely real. These are real objects displaying anomalous performance characteristics. Yeah, I mean, there's been an official set of activities that you can look at starting, maybe 2017 with the release of those New York Times videos and a number of initial individuals coming out, Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, et cetera, that kind of got this ball rolling in terms of the official process to try to break down some of the internal taboos that they felt were creating a sort of an air safety hazard, right? There were individuals inside the Navy in particular that were encountering these objects in the course of their official duties. And because the internal social taboo was so strong, they weren't officially reporting it. And so this was seen as just a basic operational hazard that needed to be addressed. And that grabbed the attention of some members of Congress, in particular in the Senate. And that kickstarted a series of amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act, kind of the principal authorizing language for all of our defense programs, that stood up a number of different reporting requirements and offices to take a harder look at this question and report back to Congress. And that has sort of been the sequence of sort of steps we've been taking for the past few years as Congress, especially a few members of the Senate, have asked questions, gotten answers. Some of those answers have not been satisfactory. So they put in more requirements, more strict reporting, and try to get to new questions that they feel like they don't have sufficient answers to. And so we've been in this sort of escalation of congressional interest, where every time they've sort of peeled back a particular onion, they've had more questions. So that's where we are now, sort of the progression of those questions has gotten to the point where now they're asking very pointed questions about very specific things related to legacy programs that have been alleged to retrieve and reverse engineer, quote, technologies of unknown origin and biological materials. Those are definitions that they put into the bills that the Senate passed last year. And so that's kind of where we are now, right? It's now moved from kind of this, social fiction, this kind of taboo in historical imaginations and our sort of different narratives over the past several decades into an official focus of government investigation.
And how do these corridors of power work within U.S. government?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems to me like there's secret departments, secret budgets, but who are these? Who are these secret departments? Where does their authorization come from? Where do their objectives come from? Which departments talk to which departments? Like, who's benefiting from this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole archipelago of official secrets. Different government agencies have different mission responsibilities and different authorizing either statutes or executive orders to determine what sorts of information is classified and to what level and what sort of degrees of protections it's afforded. If you zoom out, there are kind of two big buckets of secrecy. There's the Department of Energy, which has its own law, the Atomic Energy Act, which was its initial sort of formulation started to take shape in the late 1940s, but it's really in the early 1950s that it was codified. And it established a kind of whole separate regime for protecting our nuclear secrets, right? Both restricted data that we think about in terms of nuclear weapons design, as well as information we collect on foreign nuclear programs. That's sort of trans-classified foreign nuclear information. We also classify basic physics under Atomic Energy Act. So we can, within the Atomic Energy Act, there's certain information that's, quote, born secret, meaning it doesn't require any special designation by an original classification authority. If it meets the definitions of the statute, it is secret by definition. So any individual that just like a scientist that is discussing certain basic physics could be potentially violating that statute. And so that definition applies to, or that statute applies to a number of different things that it defines, including special nuclear material. So it sets up a whole arrangement of security clearances. The equivalent of top secret is called the Q clearance. And so if you work in the Department of Energy, the main subset of the Department of Energy that works on nuclear materials is the National Nuclear Security Administration, and they handle essentially our nuclear stockpile and make sure that the weapons are ready to give to the Defense Department for use in our platforms. So that's a whole architecture of secrecy. Within the Department of Energy, they also have their own special access program, so things that need to be protected with extraordinary measures, right, to ensure that no adversary can, one, even understand that they exist. So that's kind of the classic black programs. So DOE has their own architecture for special access programs. And then you have the more traditional, much larger zone of classified activities within the Defense Department and the intelligence community. Those are the main big buckets. But even things like DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has their own special access programs. NASA even has their own special access programs. And so within the Defense Department or the intelligence community, which is where the majority of the folks that work on classified materials work, you get access to information associated with your position, whether you've been granted a top secret designation by your agency, and then a need to know to access particular compartments. And so that is basically the architecture. It's pretty sprawling. Probably, at least a few million people have top secret clearances. But any particular program, the fundamental principle is compartmentalization, meaning that you might have the tickets, but if you don't get granted need to know to a particular program or subprogram, you might not know it even exists.
So I wanted you guys to hear that and read along with it at the same time. That's Matthew Pines. Now, that was on Mr. Obnoxious. I'll leave a link in the description for that. That was a good podcast, too. And what he was talking about there is the kind of stovepiping, need to know how these projects are, siloed and separate. And this is what David Grush was basically saying when he came out and whistle blew, and he covered this on Rogan, and when he talked to Tucker Carlson, how, there's no communication. There's no person overseeing the operation. So that these people are studying these technologies and they're not able to communicate with each other, and that this has become kind of a Wild West. and it's holding back, advancements. It's holding back discovery, and it needs to come out. Now, this is what David Grush was, saying, and it sounds like that's what Matthew Pines was saying. And he goes in way deeper on the whole remote viewing and how, reality, we're able to interact with reality in some very strange ways that aren't really understandable, but it's a thing. Psychic phenomenon. There's actually, I don't know if any of you are familiar with telepathy tapes, but that's actually about nonverbal autistic children being able to interact with each other psychically, even when they're not even together. It's really strange. And that they're actually able to interact with their mother psychically. So they know that this is a thing. And the CIA has had their little programs where they experimented with remote viewing. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of SRI, Stanford Research Institute, Russell Targ. This is Hal Puthoff was, you know, involved with that. But one of the other things that Matthew Pine spoke about that I found really interesting was that they can just classify basic, just physics, right? So they can just classify a whole branch of knowledge, right? That is interesting. And there's Eric Weinstein has actually come out and spoken about he thinks that string theory is just the deep state watching people chase their tails trying to figure it out because it's you know it's supposedly like a failure. They haven't been able to figure it out. And how long has it been going on? It's still like the main, I believe Susskind, in an interview, he even said as much. The string theory's a failure, and then Jesse Michels did these episodes about anti-gravity and, Thomas Townsend Brown and Babson and Banson. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with these names, but these people were studying anti-gravitic technology and they were really, really into it. And there's actually articles from like scientific magazines back then where they were saying, that we were close. I think they called it the G drive or something, and that we were really close to that this was going to be a thing in the very near future. And then it just went black.
See, this book is the lid to a rabbit hole, and once you've opened it, I'd turn back if I was you.
When it comes to reverse engineering UFOs, the guy that comes to mind for most people is Bob Lazar. But what if I were to tell you that Lazar isn't the first person in American history to work on UFOs? In fact, there's a mysterious mid-century American inventor whose flying saucer-shaped gravitators attracted the attention of the government's top brass. The man I'm talking about is named
Townsend Brown.
Townsend Brown.
Townsend Brown. Townsend Brown.
Townsend Brown.
There's a guy named Townsend Brown.
Okay, Townsend Brown. I want to look that up.
The holy grail of physics involves the unification of the four fundamental forces, which includes finding a missing link between electromagnetism and gravity. Einstein actually spent the latter half of his career trying to solve for this mathematically.
We're not being honest about the failure of string theory.
There's an infinite number of universes that are possible right in your room.
Michio Kaku is out of control.
It is my belief that this spooky inventor may have experimentally discovered this long-sought link.
They're all going against the wind.
Quieted down because nobody ever got anywhere, or it quieted it down because they did get somewhere and it went black.
Any questions from last time?
Nothing. Now it's like, considered science fiction. But you look at like Amy Eskridge, the story of Amy Eskridge and Dr. Ning Lee, Dr. Amy Eskridge. And, they were working on these things at Alabama Huntsville. Um, and both had mysterious. They met. They met their demises basically under mysterious circumstances, and a lot of people think it had to do with their research in that field of study. And if the government's able to classify just a branch of knowledge, right? Like you're not allowed to know this, and if you do know it, you know, I don't know how they. What would they do? Like, do they read the person in on it, or if the person just can't keep their mouth shut, they just take care of them? I don't know. That's a fascinating interview, and you know, I just wanted to go over that part of it because things that Matthew Pines is speaking about, David Grush has spoken about, you know, to Congress and on numerous interviews about this, you know, how they keep everything separate. You know, there's no communication. And that was the thing about Dr. Amy Eskridge. She was like, she had like a master in biology, you know, physics, electrical engineering, like all kind of chemical. She was like, you know, chemist. You know, she was really, she was a genius, and she was very well. You know, she knew about all this stuff. So she had like this multidisciplinary field of study where she was able to. It was almost like she was multiple different scientists, just in one person, which you don't see that a lot. And maybe that's why she was so close to cracking it. You know, the anti-gravity. And like some people will think I'm talking crazy, but you know, if you just research Amy Eskridge, you'll see that she's everything that I'm saying she was. Just very interesting. But stay tuned. I want you guys to check this out too. Let me know if you like this format where you could read what he's saying, because Matthew Pine speaks very quickly. That's why I did it this way. This way you can kind of read along to what he's speaking about. Dude is just very, very smart. Stay tuned.
Indelible. But getting your name added to the list isn't just a function of asking for it. You actually have to have the need to know, and the existing managers of the program have to validate that access. Within the legislative branch, obviously we have committees of jurisdiction, armed services committees, intelligence committees, oversight committees that are responsible for making sure that the programs that they're authorizing and that they're funding are doing what they want them to do. And that's, of course, like, you know, they're limited in terms of their budgets, their staff, right, to actually dig into these, you know, billion-dollar programs with thousands of different people and many different contractors and try to get a sense in real time of what's actually happening. They ask for briefings, they ask for government accountability, you know, audits. So there's different levers that they can use to sort of try to get questions answered and to investigate allegations of impropriety. You know, the UAP story kind of came out of that version of that sort of oversight mechanism where individuals that were tasked by Congress in the sort of, you know, the early stages of their interest in this, they stood up this task force, sort of interagency task force called the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Task Force that was under the auspices of the naval sort of intelligence. And they went around essentially asking, you know, their colleagues, right, like, Congress is interested in these subjects. Do you have any UAP related information or programs? And so David Grush was a member of that task force. Carl Nell was a member of that task force. It was led by a guy named Jay Stratton, and they, you know, did their job. They did their investigation. Congress was like, hey, we've had people telling us that apparently there are some UAP related programs that we have not been briefed into. You know, we want you to look into this. And that's where David Grush went around and, you know, found a number of people that were working on these programs and gave him information, gave him materials, gave him, you know, very detailed program information. And so he, in the course of that, realized that there was impropriety, right? That there were programs doing things that were not authorized by their original charter, at least to his investigation. So he reported that through the official channels, kind of whistleblower channels, first in the Defense Department, the Office of the Inspector General, and then he was retaliated against as a result of providing that that testimony, and then.
How was he retaliated against?
So he had a number of his accesses basically cut off. Basically, his clearance to do his job was removed.
But there's no whistleblower protection against that.
There, at the time, there were pretty general whistleblower protections, but within the intelligence community, it's been kind of known that's kind of sort of weak tea in terms of its protections, especially against things like that can be done in more like administrative guises, right? Like, you know, suspending someone's clearance, is kind of a standard, tactic. It's hard to challenge, right? It's usually, it doesn't like they actually fired you. They just sort of made it harder for you to do your job. A certain compartment can just decide, we want to, cut off access to these people from the, another agency. So yeah, there is kind of a gray zone where you can sort of wield administrative tactics to sort of punish people that are asking the wrong questions.
That was like the professional backlash, but there was also personal backlash, wasn't it?
Yeah, so he faced a number of personal incidents. In his, I haven't been in a position to like describe exactly what happened to him, but it was very, very personal what happened to him. At his home, and so I think
Is that public?
I think he's spoken about it.
okay. I mean, he's described, certain things happened at his house that were intended to intimidate him. And yeah, so he filed a separate complaint to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, and that's what triggered congressional notification. So the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community did a preliminary investigation per their basic SOP, about a 2-week review where they talked to other individuals that he referred to, and other individuals then subsequently that they interviewed, validated sort of to a first order that his complaint had merit. It was urgent and credible, and so
One of the speculative theories is that these advanced intelligences, right, they can manipulate time and exist in um like a different temporal framework. And I know that came out kind of temporal framework. What am I talking? S- And it's like this, like a parallel kind of reality, you know. And when you get into this quantum physics thing, they talk about like the observer effect, and which is really strange. And then it gets into like non-locality and all of this, and consciousness having actually being able to affect your environment, and that sounds kind of wacky, right? But there seems to be um, people that are that much smarter than me that actually believe this 100%. And I tend to think that it's definitely a possibility. I think reality, and I think we're finding this out gradually, that reality is way stranger than we previously thought. So I got this book, right? It's Think and Grow Rich, and I've been reading it. And one of the chapters is anyway. It's Napoleon Hill, and basically he knew Andrew Carnegie, the big steel magnate from back in the you know late 1800s, early 1900s, and basically he created the steel mills industry. And I'm from Pittsburgh, and still even now I look at those mills, and I just wonder, like, how did he figure out how to mass produce steel, And you just look at the world around us, and steel is used in you know all different facets of our society, from the automobile industry to and a lot of that stuff got outsourced to China, but there's still some steel mills in Pittsburgh. But that's not what the book's about. The book is about how to think and grow rich, how to use your mind to grow rich. And at one point in that book, he speaks of developing a mastermind, right? And that's like developing a group and meeting with that group regularly and figuring out the direction you want to go, the goals you want to achieve, how to achieve the goal, what you need to do. And that this mastermind actually has the ability to kind of propel you into the reality that you're looking for. And I think that, you know, the secret societies of the world. And listen, man, I think that they exist. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory, right? And I think that's like a lot of, you see like these think tanks, Rand Corporation, these that were developed by our government. And so I think when you have a group of minds that are coming together to to achieve a goal, right? It's a very powerful thing. So just like how just if one person can affect their own reality and their environment, and their consciousness is powerful enough to do that. Imagine with a group of people, you know? And then this brings you back to like, some people that are religious may think of the power of prayer. And look, I know I'm getting kind of woo, man, but it's a thing. It's definitely a thing. And I think like Matthew Brown kind of is into this type of stuff, more of a cult type stuff. And I'm saying that because of the tweets. These enigmatic tweets that he left. And it's apparent that psychic phenomenon is a thing. Remote viewing is a thing. Um, and then like with the Monroe Institute and the Gateway tapes, out of body experiences is a thing. Near death experiences is a thing. And that quantum mechanics and our understanding of reality is bearing out the facts that a lot of this stuff is real. It's no longer on the fringe. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to this is always comes back to this. Is this a simulated reality, right? And are these UAPs, are these non-human intelligences, are these whatever it is, are they the simulators, right? Is that what that cryptic statement that Matthew Brown made at the end of that third episode of the Weaponized podcast, where he was speaking about, a carefully crafted false reality that we live in, and that we're not being made aware of the greater reality that we need to be aware of. That, that like something is being kept from us. What is that, right? And it makes me think like, is it a simulated reality, man? You know, is all this an illusion? We only experience this with our five senses. And if that's the case, who's the simulators? You know, I mean, are we about to be red pilled? If they do tell us what's really going on, is that why some people are saying, if you knew what I knew, you wouldn't want to know, or you wouldn't want everybody to know? It's a common thing. It's what people have told people like Ross Coulthart and other investigators who have tried to really get to this truth. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I'm going to leave a link in the description for both podcasts, the one with Matthew Pines and the one with David Grush. I think that it's important, to go back and listen to them again. I can't figure it out. I can't put my finger on it. I'm glad you guys are here with me today to try to. I know this is kind of more informational, more investigative, like just trying to figure this out, just trying to work it out, trying to read between the lines of what people are saying, which, hey, I don't know. But if you liked it, you enjoyed it, please hit the like and subscribe, share it to a friend, share it to two friends. I'll be back tomorrow. Peace.